You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Footsteps up the Capitol steps. A messenger arrives. The Congress is talking, declaiming, debating, with no idea of the message that is about to hit them. This is not the friendliest time in Congress. The parties are close, and there are factions within all the parties. Whigs and Democrats, but also Northern Whigs and Southern Democrats. It took months to elect a speaker in the House, and in the Senate, it nearly comes to pistols. The messenger runs, message in hand, down the hallway. He hands it to the sergeant-at-arms. In the Senate, a similar message arrives, and a senator says, "Gentlemen, I must announce, the President of the United States is dying." The senator making that announcement is no one short of Daniel Webster. What? The president, Zachary Taylor, seemed healthy, strong. He had been walking the streets. He had been at the July 4th celebrations. He had dedicated the Washington Monument. No, this message says he has not days, but just hours to live. In the House, a crazy scene. A motion is made to adjourn. That makes all the sense in the world, right? It's the President of the United States is dying. His family, his doctors are informing Congress now. In the House, the news is delivered. And a motion also is made to adjourn. And as if to signify the era and the issues, even the seemingly unimportant, honorific procedure of just adjourning the House is opposed. Several members rise. They want to keep the House going. They're members from Ohio. "You will not adjourn this House," one of them says. A member from Georgia responds, "We must." But the members of Ohio mean no disrespect to President Taylor. In fact, quite the opposite. The Ohio men say, "You will not close this House until you have cleared Zachary Taylor's name." Because indeed, as the president is dying, Congress, unbeknownst of this fact, had been voting to perhaps censure the president. They didn't censure him, but more than a few congressmen voted to do it. It would be hard to estimate the surprise and the emotions of this day, the sadness upon the Capitol. Pretty soon, the White House, the executive mansion, is going to be draped in black bunting. Now, for you and I, this isn't a surprise per se. We know our history. We know Zachary Taylor is one of those presidents who died in office. That's what you learn, right? The American people at this time had the opposite feeling. He was a hale and hearty man, older, but a military hero who fought on the frontier, who fought in a foreign land, a bridge maybe. The president in office after the country had taken the new lands from Mexico and had grown in size from 1.8 million miles to 3 million miles and had new citizens on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. The first president, perhaps, we could say, to serve entirely in a telegraph era where news is telegraph, including this news. Robbery is the cry. The nation's hero was stolen. This is what the Princeton Theologian is going to say. In a eulogy in Chicago, former Congressman Abraham Lincoln says, "Wisdom and patriotism are worthless unless sustained by the people's confidence. In his death, we have lost a degree of that confidence. And Jefferson Davis said, those who know him best will equally honor him for the purity, the generosity, the magnanimity of his private character. These two men, who later will be embroiled in a conflict. For Davis, it's even more emotional because Taylor had been his father-in-law and good friend. Cannons fired every few minutes in Richmond. Is this just a contemporary feeling of the kind that any nation would have, right? Of losing a leader? Is Zachary Taylor just one of those presidents who died in office like Harrison? There's not much to say. You don't have to think about him as a president. You don't have to think about his actions. He can't be credited. He can't be blamed. He's just a neutral. He didn't live long enough in office. Is that the way he is? I'll spoil it. I don't think so. What can we grab and learn from him? The verdict of today's history's publishing industry is clear. Not much, they say. It's hard to find a book on Taylor. There are 3 or 4 biggies, but it can't compete with the coverage of other presidents. Blame the Union Army. When they burned his son's house, Colonel Robert Taylor had joined the Confederate Army. When Union soldiers arrived at his house, they burnt it to the ground, including Zachary Taylor's papers. But there's something funny about the few books that are out there, that are published. To a book, each of them sees a reason to make a case that Zachary Taylor is better than the kind of treatment he's getting in history.
Each year, a U.S. military general or flag officer lays a wreath from the White House at Taylor's gravesite on his birthday. Taylor was America's 12th president. He grew up in Louisville before joining the Army in 1808. Taylor was actually the last president born before the U.S. Constitution was drafted.
Even Zachary Taylor's death on July 9th, 1850, 10:30 at night, even his death is not fully a settled question. The body of the 12th president is removed from his tomb. It's at the behest of a novelist and a history professor who secures the support of one of his great, perhaps, descendants. While researching her novel, this novelist was convinced that Taylor was poisoned. At the time of his death, when that messenger was running up the footsteps, it was just as Congress had a major decision to make, really a set of decisions to make, a compromise, and his death turned the tide. This can't be doubted. And to this novelist, and to a lot of people, it seems just too much of a coincidence. I suppose you could see it this way. Did someone put arsenic in his food? This was the question the novelist and the professor asked. Taylor's body was exhumed, and because his wife Margaret never wanted him embalmed, even though that would have been practice at the time, they were able to do arsenic testing. They looked at his hairs. No arsenic. No more than there is actually, believe it or not, an amount that we all have. No more than that. That settles it, right? Though there are some that argue even with those results relating to testing and wear in the hairs that I really can't get into. I personally don't see it, the story of him being poisoned. And I think it's actually a misreading of the history to make that little movie in your head where something like that happens. But I will say this, nothing about Taylor is clear. The history of Zachary Taylor always carries with it a counterfactual. There's always a what if in discussing this president. Was he a savior? Was he a prophet? Was he a nullity? This is what we'll talk about in what I believe is going to be 3 episodes. But first, fire and arrows. Arrows aimed with skill in Fort Harrison during the War of 1812. This fort, as you can surmise, was named after the territorial governor of that territory and soon to be President of the United States. Taylor's instructions was to secure this stronghold on the Wabash River. Even the trek was perilous. Of 80 men, 56 make it due to disease. Many were sick as they reached the fort. In fact, the majority are. A figure approaches Taylor, an Indian that Taylor had met, Joseph Lamar, with a flag of truce, a band of 40 women with him. He says the local chief would like to set up trade with the fort. And can they help with food? Zachary Taylor senses a trick, and he sends them off. More friendly Indian tribes, Miamis, warn Taylor that his senses are indeed right. Foul play is coming. Burning arrows. Everyone who is healthy, all but the sickest, assume their station. Here's how Edwin Hoyt describes it. The fort was built of oak and honey locust logs which had been taken from the land in the Wabash River area. It was built on a sharp bend in the river. Altogether, it was about 150 feet square. The blockhouses held the fort's food and some other supplies. If it were destroyed, it would leave them starving. Zachary tried to organize his defenses. He ordered men to form a bucket brigade. They stood despondent and pleaded that they could not drop the bucket into the well. One of the women dropped into the well and hoisted one brimming bucket to the top after another. Some of the men then took heart and decided they need not be massacred after all. And the fire raged on, becoming worse when a barrel of whiskey burned and sent flames to the skies. The sick and the weary were ready to give up, even more so when two of the strongest able-bodied men leaped the stockade and ran for their lives, certain that the fort was doomed. Zachary pushed the defenders. The able-bodied soldiers and civilians took post on the rims of the stockade and the undamaged blockhouse and shot steadily. Convalescent soldiers and the women helped extinguish any fires inside. For 7 hours, the attackers whooped and circled, trying to breach a wall or climb the stockade, but they were thrown back every time they threatened. The surgeon's assistant was killed. A soldier shot down an Indian and stood up to tell the garrison, only to fall himself, the victim of a bullet. Taylor is calm during this. It takes great execution in the midst of arrow fire. After the deserters scrambled over the walls, they were pursued by Indians, and one of them was captured and killed. The other escaped, but finding nowhere to go, turned back to the fort and cried for readmission. Zachary Taylor would not hear of it. In fact, he ordered his men to shoot him. But the man was able to hide inside a barrel and later made his way into the fort and was saved. For 7 hours they worked, fighting and drowning the fires. The garrison and the women put out the fires. The able-bodied erected a stockade where the burned blockhouse had stood. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the stockade was up, and the Indians could see in the morning light that their plan to burn out the garrison had failed. They withdrew. When Zachary Taylor sends the message out, 1,200 men come to relieve the fort. The governor of Indiana compliments him. Eastern newspapers take notice. The firm and almost unparalleled defense by Captain Taylor, they say. Most importantly, President James Madison now knows his name and gives him the rank of brevet general. What this means is no raise in pay. The man who led the defense of Harrison, Zachary Taylor, was born in Orange County, Virginia, 8 years after the American Revolution. His father served in that war. In exchange, his father received Kentucky land, and the Taylors immediately settled in it. In fact, his father cleared that land near Louisville in time for Zachary to be brought there. Beargrass Creek was a 400-acre farm. Wild animals and Indian tribes occupied the area that the family lived in. As a child, a neighbor showed him her scalped hair. He learned to read and write by his mother, who was from the upper class of Virginia society, and he joined the army at age 23, when Jefferson increased his size in 1808. He was a recruiter in Maysville, Kentucky. The third son in a family related to President Madison and expected to serve. His brother had served in the Army and was killed in 1811. His father served as a justice of the peace in the area and was a member of the Kentucky Convention. Their house started as a wood structure and then eventually a brick one with walnut walls inside. They acquired more and more acres till the Taylors owned 10,000 acres in Kentucky. Zachary Taylor loaded tobacco on flatboats in Louisville, and he drank at its taverns. He wore blue jeans, leather moccasins, coonskin cap. He did work at his farm near his dad and his family. The family had 7 enslaved people. Then this grew to 20. Taylor would, in one form or another, own people his entire life. We can't run from that fact. We can't talk about all the wonderful kind of blue-collar work that Zachary Taylor's doing himself, or his braveness in fighting and such like that without also noting him and his family participated in the economic system of this time. We can do that while talking about later how it appears that he wanted to limit the spread of this practice that he participated in. Here's Albert Smith. Despite superficial appearances, Taylor was by birth an American aristocrat. His ancestors settled in Virginia in the 1640s. His great-grandfather, James Taylor, was also James Madison's great-grandfather. His grandmother was in the Lee family of Light Horse Harry, later Robert E. He had pilgrims in his distant family. His early positions were assisted by being related to an American president. Taylor serves in 1812. Taylor serves in the Black Hearth War, an affair in Frontier, Illinois, that we did a separate podcast on. He had his opinions about it, not positive. He serves in Florida in the Seminole War. He had strong opinions on how Indians should be treated in contrast to how the U.S. Army was conducting itself at times. He also went to war and prosecuted those wars. Now, by you're getting to the time of 1840, he does have some political influence, writing to President Harrison that Senator John Bell of Tennessee would make a good Secretary of War. Taylor is thought of as a Whig, even though he's serving in the Army and it's nonpartisan. Polk has an issue. He wants to push the boundary of the United States with Mexico, and that's the Texas boundary, to the Rio Grande. He'd love to have someone who was not Zachary Taylor lead that expedition. He'd love to have someone who is not a Whig, who's not the party opposed to his party, lead that expedition. Polk is a professional politician, had been Speaker of the House. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows if he appoints a general, that general could be famous. That general could perhaps be the one that would oppose him as president at some point. Here's Maxim Armbruster. Polk never lost sight of the political implications of any of the military actions. He did not want the exploits of either Scott or Taylor to accrue to politics. And as a Jacksonian, he knew very well how the public loved its military heroes. He tries as best he can to find a Democratic general. The U.S. Army is a federal service. Democrats just tended to frown on this, and to actually find a commanding general, like that level of general, he can't. And so he tries to make one. He'd like Senator Thomas Hart Benton, the senator from Missouri, a Democrat, and Benton would very much like to do it, but he wants to be a general-in-chief in order to leave the Senate and take the job. It has to be of substance. That requires congressional approval. That requires a congressional vote. They're not going to get it in this polarized time. And people aren't just polarized about Democrats and Whigs at this time, the two parties. They're polarized about Benton because he's offended a few, even in his own party. And so Taylor is given the assignment. He's told to report to Texas. He's told to drill an army and get ready to get down to the Rio Grande River and enforce the U.S. boundary, which he does, and then some. He ends up getting into a scuffle with Mexican troops as he moves more and more south. He sends a telegraph: "If the enemy oppose my march in whatever force, I shall fight him." He has no idea that this is becoming like a giant slogan that's going to go viral, as we would say today, and spread across the United States. America's gripped in war patriotism. Southern writers writing these romantic novels about brave Mexican war soldiers. Walt Whitman writing celebratory lines. He's an editor in the Brooklyn Eagle at this time. James Fenimore Cooper will write his last novel, will be a novel about this new Mexican war and the brave soldiers. He's really just delivering a message. That's pretty standard military stuff, especially in a time where the telegraph is early and you can't be too verbose. Southern Whig newspapers, the Whig Party, very strong in Georgia, Kentucky, Alabama, North Carolina. Newspapers start promoting Zachary Taylor for president, raising the Whig banner. Even Northern Whigs start to give this attention. And very importantly, Thurlow Weed sees what's going on in these other newspapers. Now, he's a New Yorker. He's not a Southerner. He doesn't support slavery generally, and his big candidate is Seward. But he sees the talk about Taylor and says, this could work. We could beat the Democrats this way. Indeed, the political boom of Zachary Taylor, which actually starts in 1846, 1847, and then goes to, it's almost a little late by the time we get to 1848. It has less of that boomlet. Zachary Taylor is a creature of the media, of the newspapers, of increased printing technology. He could have been a fad. It helps some congressmen running in the 46 elections and the 47 elections to use the Zachary Taylor name for newspaper editors to put that banner on their newspapers. So it's already starting to get like, people are already getting a little tired. It's overplayed, as we might say today, by the time the presidential election comes. Certainly Henry Clay was thinking this is what was going on. Oh, the boomlet's dying and people are going to come back to me, the natural Henry Clay, as the Whig candidate. And you know Henry Clay, the senator from Kentucky, long a part of politics. But for a lot of reasons, it's not. Frankly, some of these reasons has to be that Polk, in not wanting to make a hero, makes a hero out of Zachary Taylor by giving him orders that he cannot follow and must disagree with. And so you have a rare combination of both a military hero and a political hero for the Whigs, because he stood up to the Democratic president, but he also wins a great battle that we'll get into later, that he wasn't supposed to fight by presidential orders that the American public don't agree with. They don't side with the president. They side with Taylor on this battle. And this, and the fact that General Winfield Scott, who also participated in a great way in the Mexican War, has more political enemies, leads to Taylor getting nominated by the Whigs. I did a 2-part episode on the 1848 election, so I won't talk too much about that. But that's essentially what happens. Foreign visitors said Americans were always, they seemed to be reading something. Virtually every paper supported a cause, a political party, or particular politician. Democratic Union was against Taylor. Whig National Intelligentsia was pro-Clay. Reporters from New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, all had reporting bureaus in Washington, D.C. So did Atlanta, Charleston, Montgomery, and New Orleans. Taylor sees the traditional Whig paper, the National Intelligentsia, as too pro-Clay. And even though Clay and Taylor are Whigs, he decides, or his team decides, we'll create a pro-Zachary Taylor paper. And that's the way you did it then. Papers were always springing up in Washington, D.C. And so they create the Republic. Now the warrior was in the middle of a very different kind of battle. He's 64. He's the chief magistrate of the nation. Official Washington, including his own party, scoffed at him. Daniel Webster, the shining senator from New England, the great orator at this time, thought him an illiterate frontier colonel. And he wasn't. The discovery of letters only in the 1950s would prove Webster very wrong. Maxim Armbruster writes, he was in every sense a national man, and as such, possessed greater qualities of leadership than did any executive between Jackson and Lincoln. A national man, one who was related to James Madison and good friend with George Washington's grandnephew Curtis. In fact, Curtis is going to be one of the first in D.C. to propose the name of Zachary Taylor, that this is the guy who should be president, and having Curtis Washington, having a Washington behind you, a big boon for him. And Washington was also a frequent visitor at the Taylor White House. Unlike any president before, the city of D.C. wasn't some place he was going to from elsewhere. I mean, it was, but he had been already in the nation's service and was just serving at a different post. He wore black broadcloth on the streets of Washington. He was always walking those streets. He would become a familiar sight. He'd walk from the mansion to the War Department. He'd pass the pigsties, the privies, the garbage on the streets, the White House. Dolly Madison still lived in this city. She was a frequent visitor at the White House. There was a crabapple tree near the Blair House across from the mansion. The Octagon House nearly once served as a temporary government headquarters when the city was burned. St. John's Episcopal Church was beautiful. Ceremonies were constant. Federal employees, senators, war vets were always welcome to the White House. Ministers, the Brazilian, Argentine, Russian ministers visited the executive mansion often. Zachary Taylor would call on the important social guests of D.C., including, we should say, Mrs. Alexander Hamilton and Mrs. John Quincy Adams. From Holt Hamilton's Zachary Taylor Soldier in the White House, there is much of the sightseer in him, and he took pleasure in the scene, strolling around Lafayette Square, where the Jackson statue would soon stand, and sauntering down 15th Street past the 2-story State Department building and the unfinished Treasury. He would retrace his steps part way on 15th, turning east at Pennsylvania Avenue and following its brick sidewalk that stretched towards the Capitol. On the 4th of July, with Mrs. Taylor at his side, he listened to Baptist Sunday school children treble a patriotic hymn. He surprises visitors who have either seen the cartoons showing him as a buffoon, maybe the satirical writings of one Herman Melville, not yet having written his novel about the whale yet. He surprises visitors who read the cartoons that make him out to be an emperor, a military dictator, when they find he was neither. A newspaper reporter said, "I've seen many great personages, but none who exhibited it less." Despite these amusements in the capital city, you have in 1849, as Taylor is sworn in, everything from Calhounites who want slavery everywhere in the country, for the South to have its way, to Southern Unionists who want compromise, as long as their institutions are protected, to Northerners who are dough-facey, who are willing to do business with the South, hunkers who just want the grand old Democratic Party to get along and keep the jobs that they have, Northern Locofocos who want slavery ended, who want a new reformist Democratic Party, Know-Nothings who want to limit immigration, Wilmot Proviso supporters who want not a single bit of land acquired from Mexico to have a slave on it. And as Taylor takes office, Wilmot's Proviso is still hanging over everyone as an issue. Never acted on by Congress, but never defeated either, becoming a litmus test for Northern politicians and a wedge issue for Calhounite Southerners. And that's not all. Gold has been discovered in California, and a flood of migrants from New York and elsewhere, mostly from the North, but a few Southerners too. The amount of people from the North and some from the South that flock to California because of this gold make it larger than a couple of existing states. Texas, recently admitted to the Union, claims most of New Mexico as part of its territory. Brigham Young and his Mormon community in Utah would like territorial status. I sincerely thank you and dear Ann for your kind congratulations on account of my success in reaching the office in question, which I look upon more as a bed of thorns than one of roses. And however strange it may appear, I would greatly prefer that the mantle had fallen on someone of the most distinguished Whigs I could name, instead of myself. Zachary Taylor, Virginian-born man who served on the nation's first frontier, now transported to the heart of factional battle, muddy Washington, District of Columbia. He almost had no business to be there among the decades-serving politicians and great orators. There's a lot of unanswered questions. Henry Clay wanted to be in his spot. He wanted the nomination in 1848, even though he's same party, expects Taylor to come to him. As a result, the Taylor cabinet is a lot of second or third-rate men, as politicians in Washington at the time would have described it. Probably the best is Secretary of State John Clayton or Thomas Ewing were popular politicians of their day. Taylor aches for his good friend from Kentucky, John Crittenden, who would have been, as Secretary of State, a force in D.C., a sign of power for this new Taylor administration. And instead, he's elected governor of Kentucky. We think, it's hard to tell what happens here, but we think this is Henry Clay's machination to keep Crittenden out of Taylor's administration. Because once elected governor of Kentucky, he can't refuse it. But it's really a position beneath John Crittenden. And Crittenden would have been this kind of power that Taylor needed, but it's not to be. Abraham Lincoln in Illinois notices and writes to Clayton, "You're not handling the patronage properly. It's fixing for the president the unjust character of being a man of straw in the public mind." A lot of people are trying to figure out what he'll veto, what he won't, what he'll do, what he won't. Here's Blumenthal. Elected on no platform but his military laurels. He had no record or stated opinions. He seemed passive and inscrutable, while the country was on a knife's edge of a civil war. Pulled off the battlefield. He actually has to resign his office, serving in Mexico and in Texas, and right to Washington to become the nation's leader. In the middle of some really hard debates that are going on. We've just doubled the size of the nation, but the nation has two types of states. Free states where they don't allow slavery, don't even recognize it, and slave states. Not everybody even agrees with this way of thinking. There are abolitionists who think that slaves everywhere should be free. There are, I'm going to call them for shorthand, Calhounites, followers of John Calhoun, former vice president, now senator from South Carolina. Say Jefferson Davis would be in this category, who wants slavery everywhere. You have people like Lewis Cass and Stephen Douglas who say the people of a territory should decide whether they're free or slave, and then that can be enforced. Well, Calhoun doesn't like that because he doesn't want anywhere to have free states. And then Northern abolitionists don't like that because they don't want anywhere to have slave states. So this thing is live. The other question that you have is whether there's a crisis in the country. Is there a union crisis that we have to intervene in and do something about, or not? And these kind of pressures come to Zachary Taylor's door during his limited administration. It's interesting here because what's going to happen, and it happens to a lot of 19th century presidents, is that Zachary Taylor's pretty much going to have free reign for the year of 1849. He's going to be president, and Congress really isn't in session. It ended before he took office, and they won't resume, and because of difficulties, they won't resume until 1850. So they won't be fully constituted until has House and Senate until 1850. That means that in some ways he can't get legislation done, but in other ways he has a free hand to do certain things. And one of the things that he does that nobody talks about is his trip to Pennsylvania. It was supposed to be a trip to New York and Pennsylvania. in August. So rather than sort of like retreating and going on a leisurely vacation like many people would from D.C., he goes to Pennsylvania. And very few historians have picked up on that. It is obviously political. These are two critical states in the 1848 election, and they would be critical in 1852. Here's Hamilton. From Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, Taylor went through McConnellsburg, Bedford, Somerset, and Greensburg to Pittsburgh, and thence through Economy, Beaver, and Newcastle to Mercer, Pennsylvania. At Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in Thaddeus Stevens' present, Zachary Taylor had launched into a tariff discussion. In Pittsburgh, informed that 4/5 of the country's iron houses had recently failed, the president repeated his Lancaster remarks in favor of specific tariff duties. But Mercer, where he stopped on the 23rd, was the setting for his most significant speech, and here's what he says. The people of the North, he boldly asserted, need have no apprehension of the further extension of slavery and the necessity of a third party. He's talking about the Free Soilers, which took votes from him and also helped him in different ways in the 1848 election, would soon be obviated. Here's Hamilton. Taylor's implication was that under him, the Whigs would constitute a major anti-extension party. A lot of history has written off the Pennsylvania trip, mostly because Taylor gets sick a couple times, and he's really going to get sick in Erie, Pennsylvania. He has to stay at a supporter's house and recover for a few days. But because of this, and because of the fact that things are so partisan, so Democratic papers are making fun of him, while Whig papers are saying how great his speeches are, and people are therefore writing both off. Democrats poked fun at old Zach's inability to orate, jumped all over his Mercer speech, and made sport of the president's ailment. Whig organs were not silent during these assaults. The Republic, the Washington Republic, this is Zachary Taylor's kind of home newspaper, stressed differences between Democrats who have seen the president and others deprived of that privilege. The Republic said that they had a source, a Democratic newspaper editor, who saw the president actually speak, and he said, we'll lose half our votes if old Zeke Taylor goes through here again, shaking everybody by the hand, kissing the babies and old women. Whigs as a whole, however, commended the presidential journey less eagerly than the Democrats satirized it. But here's what Hamilton notes. To Taylor's credit, in Northern Whig eyes, he spoke out boldly respecting of Cuba, slavery extension, and the tariff, critical issues before the nation. And so he doesn't elaborate on this speech in Mercer, but people in Washington note it. The right people are noting it. They also note that when he does do his second leg of the journey in New York, he's picking up new friends. Thurlow Weed, William Seward, this gang, what his own vice president, Millard Fillmore, is a different faction within New York politics, and he's not sort of hanging around with them. He's hanging around with the arguably more powerful Thurlow Weed faction. So San Juan del Norte, in what is now Nicaragua, there's a port there, Greytown, and it's kind of has been seen as a place of American settlement where it's not really owned by any particular person. British warships appear offshore the year before Zachary Taylor becomes president. They raise their flag over the harbor, claiming that they are protecting the interests of the Mosquito Kingdom. The Mosquito Kingdom is kind of a farce. It's a native protectorate. It stretches along what is now Nicaragua and Honduras. And the British essentially put them in power, kept them in power. Sending warships there, in London's view, is no matter at all. It's a trifle. In Washington, it looks like the first move in a race for control of a canal. Because now, and it's more than just that canal, it has to do with California, and it has to do with gold. It has to do with the Pacific Ocean. Because if Britain controls this area, this is one of the most logical areas to get a canal built between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Now, this is 1849. We know this isn't going to happen for later. The technology didn't exist to build this. But I can also tell you that in the public mind of 1849, they did not see that yet. Especially compelling is the Nicaraguan case. Now, you're going to want to start to cut the time that it takes to get to California, which either has to be steamship around South America, taking anywhere from 4 to 6 months, or you can make that a lot quicker by getting into Panama, the isthmus there, and making a short trip to ships that would be on the Pacific side, except that short trip is dangerous both in health, because it's fever-ridden area, and also just dangerous with all sorts of bandits and things like that. So there really aren't great options for getting to California, but people definitely want to do it anyway. If Britain controls this port of Greytown, they control a potential canal. If they control a potential canal, you see the chess pieces moving. Now they control what America can do with its Pacific territories. The U.S. doesn't like it. Taylor doesn't like it. And if you think Taylor, the Whig president, doesn't like it, the opposing party, the Democrats, are ready to go to war. Now, Nicaragua is particularly important. Why? When you look at a map and you see, it's kind of big, why wouldn't you just want to do a Canal of Panama as in the future happened? Well, it's a little deceiving to look at the map because there is a river that flows from the Caribbean that goes into a lake that lake is pretty close to the Pacific. So a lot of people thought it wasn't so much like you had to build a full canal across the land area, that you could use rivers and lakes and a canal. And this is serious, and Cornelius Vanderbilt has money and companies formed. There's a lot of people involved in this. Taylor instructs his Secretary of State, John Clayton. Now, you remember we talked about the cabinet. Clayton's about the best asset that he has in this otherwise second-rate cabinet. He instructs Clayton to find a diplomatic solution that allows us access to this area, but avoids a war as well. Sir Henry Lytton Buller is now posted to Washington, D.C. He's thinking in similar lines, thankfully. London doesn't want to fight, but they do want to ensure that Britain's commercial fleets would never be excluded from a new route that's built. With Taylor having instructed the strategy, John Clayton and Buller talk throughout 1849. Tense talks, not public. At the same time, a Spanish soldier, Narciso Lopez, is in New Orleans, hanging around the docks, recruiting men for an invasion of Cuba. He's now turned against the Spanish government. He's turned against Madrid. He's chasing the dream of Cuban liberation. This cause, which is going to continue for the rest of the 19th century, they've got agents in Washington. He's in New Orleans trying to recruit army. He's promising American volunteers that in Cuba, in a new Cuba, we're going to welcome you as heroes. Spain's garrison is small, and it's going to melt away. And the island could join the United States if you join with me. Cuba is still under Spanish rule. Slavery remains the backbone of its sugar economy. Tens of thousands of enslaved Africans work at the plantations. Spain nominally agreed to end slave trading, but didn't really enforce it. To the American South, Cuba looks like a natural extension of its own system. Just add it to the United States. Why should it be part of this aging European power? Well, we often talk about Washington, D.C. as being this muddy little, insignificant town. But what really does make it important, no matter what it looks like in photographs or how much mud is on the streets, or how much the houses can be like shacks at time, or there's not enough housing for all the congressmen. All of these things were present in 1849. It's made important by something virtual, believe it or not, by the information that is received there. There's more, first of all, just straight mail going to D.C. than a lot of other places, a lot of information going there. There's also telegraph and circuits of telegraphs spreading news. And there's informal networks, too. So every customs agent in all of the major cities in the U.S. is sending reports. And so he finds out from his Treasury Secretary Ewing that this guy Lopez is trying to recruit an army to go take over Cuba. Taylor instructs Secretary of State John Clayton. I say Taylor instructs. We have some cabinet notes. We have diaries from John Clayton. It is Taylor instructs. Clayton never freelances. He is able, and he will kind of fill in the gaps and do some of the writing and do the negotiating. But the direction's coming from President Taylor. He orders Clayton to halt the expedition. He orders federal marshals to seize ships preparing to sail. Anything that's heading for Cuba to be part of this mission. The U.S. minister in Madrid, Daniel Barringer, was told to reassure Spain that the United States would respect its sovereignty over Cuba. Indeed, in New Orleans, there will be boarding of ships. There will be confiscated munitions. There's even New Orleans meetings that are broken up where Cuban filibusters are plotted in hotel parlors. Taylor issues a warning. Any citizen who joins such a venture must not expect the interposition of this government if captured under another flag. This is Whiggism with force. This is an area where you can see that electing a Whig president in 1848 would have been very different. Lewis Cass, the Democratic candidate running against Zachary Taylor, had made many statements that would lead you to believe that Cuba was the next logical step. He was a Manifest Destiny supporter. He was an expansionist. That's the Democratic position, the opposing position, the Cass position, not Zachary Taylor's position. So you have a definite choice in foreign policy from the Whigs here. And indeed, when Lopez does try the expedition, so he sort of does this Bay of Pigs, but instead of a Bay of Pigs coming from the U.S. government and then support pulled at the last minute, it's no support from the U.S. government. And not only is there no support, but the reverse. U.S. ships try to intercept whatever they can. Once Lopez does land in confusion, just like the Bay of Pigs that would happen 1961, these Cuban rebels are immediately routed, gathered up. One line that comes straight from President Taylor about this: the law must be executed, though it falls on friends, he says. As the actions with Britain and with Spain and Cuba are going on, there's also an overlooked piece of foreign policy in faraway Hungary. The Hungarians under Lajos Kossuth had risen against the Austrian Empire, proclaimed their independence, and were drafting a liberal constitution. This is a big issue in the United States, the democracy here, and we always like to see that our Republican values were being exported across the world. Across the United States, there are public meetings, sermons, and editorials hailing the Hungarian patriots and Kossuth as another Washington. Boston and Cincinnati send messages of support. Many Americans want the president to recognize Hungary's independence. Taylor instructs Clayton to offer no formal recognition to the Hungarian movement and to maintain friendly relations with Austria. Yet, he does allow expressions of goodwill, and there'll be no condemnation of the revolution in this country from America. Now, there is a secret mission to a Dudley man who was to proceed to Hungary and determine whether Kossuth's regime was strong enough to stay as a country. Man is a Virginian. He was part of the Paris legation. He was a diplomat there. He's familiar with the Europeans' goings-on. The commission reaches him by July 12th, and he's in Vienna. But by the time he's able to get there and do anything, give any message, assess anything, he realizes that the Hungarian forces are being reversed, mostly because of the intervention of Russians that the Austrians had called in. In his message to Congress that would be delivered in December, among many other things, Taylor expresses the balance. We have witnessed with sincere sympathy, he said, the efforts of Hungary to establish her independence and to develop a government of her own choice, but we must abstain from all interference with the domestic concerns of other nations. Kossuth's revolution fails. He flees into Ottoman territory. Taylor's government quietly urges that government to grant him refuge and to resist Austrian or Russian demands for extraditions. Here's what Holt Hamilton writes in his book, Soldier in the White House. Recognition of the Hungarians was now an impossibility, but Taylor was on record of having favored it. There's no reason why we should not recognize her independence. This attitude was not soon forgotten by young Emperor Franz Joseph, who remonstrated against it through his charge as late as 1852. Even though we remained neutral, we angered the Austrians by our ready and seeming willingness to offer independence to them. What you see in this is that Taylor maintains control over his administration in the same way a commanding officer maintains control over his unit. He ran a disciplined, military-style cabinet. He expected secretaries to submit written reports, to attend weekly meetings at the White House, usually on Tuesdays or Fridays. The Navy Secretary, Preston, later said that Taylor's method was as in council of war. He would hear all and then give the order. Just as he kept peace with London and Madrid and Austria, you have to look at this time of California, distant as it was and part of American territory, as almost a diplomacy item as well. There was no civilian governing authority in California, even as thousands of miners or potential miners are arriving there. California is under the nominal military authority of General Riley. That's a holdover from the Mexican War. Congress cannot decide yet, this is going to be a whole issue, on California because it's directly related to the slavery question. Taylor wanted a civilian order to rise before sectionalism filled the vacuum. In the summer of 1849, he sends John A. King of New York. This is Rufus King's son. Rufus King had been a prominent Federalist in New York. This is a person of some stature. So when the president sends him, Californians there are going to know they're speaking to somebody who matters. He confers with General Riley, and he directly encourages settlers to form a free state constitution. He's not to direct them in anything, but to encourage them. And as it's going to turn out, they need no encouragement. This is exactly what the Californians there want to do. In fact, by the time King gets there, the generals' call for a convention at Monterey had already gone out. King reinforces it and says, you have the president's blessing here. And so when delegates vote to ban slavery outright in California, they did so knowing the administration would stand behind them and it would have executive federal support. King's reports, carried home by ship, confirmed to Taylor that California would enter the Union as a free state without the need for any kind of compulsion. Another frontier pressed on Zachary Taylor's mind, the high desert country around Santa Fe, now New Mexico, freshly claimed from Mexico, but scarcely governed. It had been under American military occupation since war's end. No civil order existed there. The border with Mexico remained uncertain. Taylor knew if Washington's inactive here, the territory could just fall into chaos, just be kind of no man's land, or just be forever part of the sectional quarreling in Congress between North and South. So he chooses James Silas Calhoun. I have to say right at the outset here, not a relative of the John Calhoun. In fact, very different in politics. He's a Georgia Whig. He's a former India agent. And so he appoints him Indian agent in Santa Fe, but also gives him his instructions as president. He has letters from the Interior Department and from Taylor himself urging the inhabitants to form a civil government in Santa Fe of their own choosing. Now, it takes him months across plains, deserts, mountains. It'd probably be easier to get to Europe at this time. But when he arrives late in 1849, it's not the California situation. Things are uneasy. People kind of have their revolvers drawn. American officers are flying the flag of military rule. Mexican settlers there are suspicious of Washington. Apache, Navajo raiders are attacking and limiting the borders of this very uneasy area. But the local population is tired of uncertainty. And Calhoun meets with town leaders, with clergy, with army officers, and encourages them to draft petitions for a civil territorial government. Most New Mexicans, Calhoun reports to Taylor, want peace with a new government. And most of them here oppose the introduction of slavery that was illegal under Mexican law. While this diplomacy is going on, what you have to understand is the state of Texas claims this area. And they're going to get more and more aggressive about it. So part of the message here in all of this foreign and domestic intriguing is you cannot think of Zachary Taylor as a president who just bumbled around and didn't do anything and then died in office. He had definite choices. These activities that he's going to take line up directly with the first message that he sends out to Congress. In effect, his State of the Union, except he did it at the end of the year instead of at the beginning, and you sent it in written form. But everybody read it, and it outlined what a president's policies were. His first message to Congress, which is going to hit Washington hard, and people are going to have a lot of opinions about. These actions he was undertaking in California and New Mexico indicate he was already making his policy felt. We'll get into that message in the next episode.